that's what matters. It's the world we leave behind. It is the world we create. So really there's not much more that can be said other than why is there suffering in the world? A big reason could be stated that from the research I've done, in the year 2012, the total global humanitarian aid was 10%, or the spending on total humanitarian spending in the world was less than 10% of the global military spending. Why do we spend so much to make war and so little to make peace? Were we to direct those funds towards health, education, what could we not solve? There is no suffering, even the sufferings that we find in nature, through storms, through earthquakes, those could be alleviated if money was spent and corners weren't cut when producing proper infrastructure so that buildings did not collapse. It is possible, it is doable, it is up to us to end the suffering. And the one last part I'd like to leave us with, it's short and sweet, but I had mentioned at the beginnings, one of the other great sufferings that is sometimes done is we divide ourselves. And in the stories of Genesis and the creation of man, God looked at man and decided that it was, or said, it is not good to be alone. And so I look around us, and we are here in this room of many faiths, and we're not alone. And that's the best lesson I think that we can take from this. We're all in this together, and we can move forward and end the suffering. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. That was an excellent speech, and couldn't agree more. The amount of money that globally is being spent on the war in the name of so many different politicians' words, but I wish if that money was just being spent for the welfare of children, families, and there's all kinds of needs in this world. So at least we're starting that in Lloydmionster, and then we'll start with this community and see how far we can spread it. Our next speaker for this evening is Mr. Amrit Paulsen, presenting the Sikhism perspective. He was born and raised in India. He came to Canada at the age of 13 years of age. He's a firm Sikhism believer, and he has shown keen interest in religious philosophy. So please welcome Mr. Amrit Paulsen from Sikhism. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Today we have this great opportunity, a special open forum, for us to all get together and learn about one another's faith. Before me, we have listened to many well-versed scholars who have spent many years studying their religion, enlightening us on this topic of why Almighty God allows human suffering. And at this moment, I am here in front of all of you as a representative of the Sikh faith. But before starting, I want to make one thing clear, that although I am representing the Sikh religion, I am still learning the religion myself. The name of the religion Sikh means a learner, somebody who all his life keeps learning and learning. So before beginning, I would like to say that I may do injustice to the Sikh religion. I may not be able to fully answer this question, as I don't consider myself a teacher nor a preacher. I am a learner. Having said that, to begin today's discussion, for those who believe in God, the concept of suffering appears to contradict God's all-loving and powerful nature. And the question that is often posed is, how could an all-loving, powerful God allow his own creation to suffer and not intervene to stop that suffering? According to the Sikhism, previous and current bad deeds as well as desire and worldly attachments cause suffering. Just as Mr. Balakrishnan said, karma. and reincarnation. Sikhism do believe in that too. But in Sikhism, pain itself is divided in 3 different types. Pain of the body, could be bullet wound, knife stab, any mental, any sickness or anything like that. All diseases, that the people that are hungry, people that can't get any food, or just stuff like that that affects our physique. That's the pain of the body. And then the second pain is pain of the mind. When our mind is stressed, our mind is worried, and our mind is filled with depression. The Sikh religion believes that there are 5 pains of the mind that are in the verses. It says Kam, Krodh, Lobh, Moh, and Hankar. In English, that means lust, anger, worldly attachment, greed, and ego. If we let go of all these 5 things, we will not suffer much pain. That's just one theory of the pain of the mind. Pain of the soul. That's an important one, but not many people in this world have that. Pain of the soul is when a person realizes what he's actually missing. In Sikhism, when a person completely devotes himself to the God and starts to, let's say, just realizes that, all these other things in the world are not real. My creator who created the entire universe, it could be, and like Sikhism is not restricted to one religion, like we can go to any other place and call it God. So once a person realizes that I have to be a little bit in more harmony with God, that's the spiritual pain. We just don't directly get enlightened. First of all, our spirit would actually start to want that, start to get that, right? So, And Sikh religion says every single being in this world falls under one of these 3 pains, because the biggest notion I see, the biggest reason people ask this question is that sometimes a lot of us would have this question rise in our mind. It says, I go to the temple, I go to the masjid, I go to the church, I am a holy man, I try to do my duties right in this world, and then why am I suffering? Right? That question arises because somewhere in our head there's a thought stuck, or there's an illusion stuck that if we are religious, we won't have any pain in our life. But the Sikh religion says if the good times come in your life, bad times will also come. Sikh religion says everything is made in pairs. There is male and female. There's days and nights. There is happiness and pain. There's opposites to everything. Without the opposites, we cannot fully respect anything in this life. If there is no night, we would not respect the daylight. If we never have pain in our life, we will never be able to value what happiness actually is. The Sikh religion says that every person in this world has pain. Our first Guru, Guru Nanak, said, the whole world is in pain. Guru Nanak said the scholars, priests, everyone is in pain. Even the doctors that are supposed to cure our pain, they're suffering too for some kind of pain. Someday we think that we have most pain in our life. Like we're the only, when we get that feeling, you feel, why is it happening to me? Oh God, why is it me only? But that's not true. There was a Muslim Sufi fakir. His name was Baba Farid Ji. His writings are in our Sikh holy book. And his full name was Baba Sheikh Farid. And he wrote something like that. He said that, first I thought I was the only one that was unhappy. But when I started to get more in line with God, when I started to realize that the illusions are not real, I started to, when he got enlightened, and he said that as he raised his consciousness level a little bit higher than the above average people, he realized that everybody else in this world is going through the same suffering. Right? But that suffering is like to me, to me, suffering is God's way of telling you not to veer off your track. Just, you know what? Be right. Do the right things for the right reasons. And God is biased. It's like a court judge. He cannot show favoritism to anybody. Right? And with that, I'm like, see, with the mind suffering, Kam, Krodh, Lobh, Moh, Ahankar, the greed thing, and all the worldly attachments, there's a little story combined to that. Once upon a time, there was this king who was really mighty and all, and somehow he wanted to be more spiritual. He wanted to find himself. So he went to this mystique, this saintly figure in the jungle, and he said, you know what, I'll give you all the money in the world. And I have all the possessions, I have all the riches, but just tell me, how do I get moksha, get free, like Mr. Balakrishna said. And that saint told him, he said, you know what, follow me up that hill and pick up 4 stones. And the king picks up the stones. They started walking towards the top of the hill. And just a few steps ahead, the king just gets tired with all that weight. He tells the priest, he's like, you know what, I'm getting tired. And then the saint tells him to, okay, drop 1 stone off. And they go a little bit further more, and he's like, oh, I'm still tired. I cannot go up that hill with all these 3, 4 more stones. And then the saint says, okay, drop another one. And by the time they reach the top, all the stones are dropped. When all these stones are dropped, the king said, what did you prove? King asked the saint, what did that prove? He said, let go of your riches, let go of jealousy and desires, and let go all of these little things, hate and everything. You will be on a higher state of consciousness. And that is what Sikhism preaches. It just says that, okay, equality, and regardless of our religion, creed or race, anything, we should be compassionate with everybody else, because according to the gurus, it says that God resides in everyone and everything that is created by Him. So there is no room for hating anyone. But it's just this politics and all this other stuff that is making us feel, oh, you know what, if there's this country, and the country has, you know, those country people are bad, this country people are bad, just because my color is not right, I might be a bad person. But that's not what is preached. But yeah, I'm just going off the track a bit here. But with the Sikhism, if you want to leave suffering, like if you want to get relieved of it, you have to kind of let go of your ego and all the things that you want, and you have to keep yourself in a line with the name of the Almighty who has created the entire world. So the more we stray away from the name of God, the more we suffer, because He wants us to be back. And when it's, as a great man once said, that your faith is tested in the worst of the times. And that is my conclusion to this. And I think if we all see God in everybody else, just as if we respect everybody else as we respect ourselves, I think this suffering and pain would be cut down to almost 25%. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Singh. Our last speaker for this evening is Mr. Taha Sayyid, presenting the Islamic perspective, explaining why does God allow suffering. Mr. Sayyid graduated from Institute of Islamic Studies, Toronto, Ontario. Currently, he is serving as a missionary in charge of Ahmadiyya Muslim community in Edmonton. He participated in a number of conferences on topics covering academics, politics, and religions. I now welcome Mr. Taha Sayyid to please come up on stage and provide us with his explanation on why does God allow suffering.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Peace be on all of you. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. In the name of Allah, the Gracious, the Merciful. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me from another city and giving me such a difficult topic, which caused me a lot of suffering. But in the next few minutes, I will try to explain that not everything that seems like suffering is actually bad or evil. The end result of this suffering is that we all benefit from this evening. Why does God allow suffering is a question that has bothered the minds of many, and different religious philosophies have tried to explain this differently. Some suggest that suffering is a separate entity and is caused by evil. Some say that it is a byproduct of our own actions, and some say that it is a result of God's displeasure because of sin. There is no one-line answer to this question, but I shall try to shed light on this topic from the Islamic perspective. First of all, it should be kept in mind that according to Islam, suffering is not a separate entity. It is the absence of pleasure which results in suffering. Imagine a source of light like the sun, but you cannot imagine a source of darkness. The absence of light results in darkness, so the absence of pleasure and comfort results in suffering. This is one type of suffering, and it is very important to have this type of suffering. Without it, life itself would not have been possible. Life, as we know today, took millions of years to evolve. Creatures evolved from a lower state to a higher state, from a lower form of consciousness to a higher form. Pain and suffering was always a part of life, which kept life evolving. If creatures did not feel the pain of extreme cold, they would not have evolved to protect themselves from cold. The process of natural selection would not work if suffering is taken out of the equation. The Holy Quran says, chapter 67, verses 2 and 3, "Blessed is he in whose hand is the kingdom, and he has power over all things, who has created death and life that he might try you, which of you is best in deeds, and he is the mighty, the most forgiving." The philosophy of life and death mentioned here, as we move away from life, we move towards death. Those who conduct themselves best survive longer. It is called survival of the fittest. The forces of life and the forces of death are constantly in a struggle, and the result of this struggle is that life will either move towards death or away from it. This constant struggle of life and death is the essence of evolution. Now let's consider a hypothetical scenario and take suffering completely out of the equation. In this scenario, all forms of life are equally provided for. Everyone is at the same level. There is no need or struggle to gain a higher form of consciousness, because everyone is already at the same level. This will create innumerable problems. In this scenario, life remains at its earliest rudimentary stage. Nothing gets evolved to a higher form of life, and humans do not come into existence. This is just a hypothetical scenario to show that suffering and trial is a catalyst for progress. Now, enough of evolution. Let's look at some of the other reasons for suffering and what role does God play in introducing, continuing, or removing suffering. The verses of the Quran that I quoted earlier has a word, liyabluwakum, which means that he might try you. It comes from the word bala, which means trial or test. The word bala means two types of tests, good and bad. Sometimes a test is good. In this type of test, a person is rewarded with wealth, health, and other forms of desirable conditions are granted to one, to see if he or she uses that wealth or advantages responsibly or not. The other kind of test is such that a person is put through trials and experiences some level of suffering, and in order to go through this kind of trial, one has to show patience. God does this so that he can test people and see how they conduct themselves in prosperity and adversity. But the question that comes to mind is that if God is all-knowing, then why would he test people? If he already knows the result, then why would he put people through tests? God may know the results, but people do not know their qualities and weaknesses unless they are tested, and as a result of that test, they learn where they are lacking. The Prophet of Islam, peace be upon him, went through a long period of extremely painful trials and went through many forms of suffering. All his male children died in infancy. He was poor, helpless, and persecuted most mercilessly. Yet these trials never stopped him from acting righteously. Being in need himself, he would still not say no to another destitute. This conduct impressed his followers so much that they also began to emulate him, and soon a large group of followers was formed, and they all exhibited these good qualities. Then when the Prophet got prosperity and wealth, he again showed those great qualities of forgiveness and generosity for which he was famous. Same is the case with all other prophets and many great people in the world who became role models for others. Thus, God does not need to know anything by putting people through trials. It is the people who need to know. Through suffering, we can learn about our own moral or physical conditions, and also other people can become examples for others to follow. Let us turn our attention now to some more complex and controversial questions. When natural disasters strike, a lot of innocent people die. If God is a merciful God, then why does he not save these people? Or if, as a result of God's wrath, evildoers are killed, innocent also end up dying with them, for example, little children, what crime could they have possibly committed? If God is all-powerful, then he has the ability to save them. If he has the ability to save them, but is unwilling to save them, then he is, God forbid, malevolent. How can this be a merciful God? Before we try to answer these questions, it should be kept in mind that not all states of happiness and suffering are a result of reward or punishment. Every child that is born healthy is not being rewarded for any good deeds, and every child that is born with defects is not being punished for some crime. These are merely just unavoidable byproducts of the grand scheme of life as we know it. But still, if God can remove suffering, why does he not remove it? If God removes suffering every time an innocent suffered, then we would have to say that all suffering should be removed from every innocent creature. But then we would run into the same trouble as I mentioned earlier about not being able to evolve. No matter how we look at it, suffering is a byproduct of life. Without it, life would lose all meaning. Another question can be asked here: if God is all-powerful, then why he could not have created a system in which we evolved without any form of suffering? A system in which evolution occurred but no suffering. The answer is that such a system cannot be imagined. This was answered in the beginning. If there's no suffering, life would have stayed in its rudimentary stages. So if we try to remove suffering from the equation, we run into countless problems. It can be said that all these examples are related to the progress of life, and suffering can be accepted as a necessary byproduct to cause the continued thrust of life. But what about when religious scriptures speak of devastating disasters that kill millions of people as a result of God's wrath? And many of the religious scriptures do speak of God sending his punishment on people. Plagues, earthquakes, famine, and floods are just a few examples of God's punishments sent down to people when they become extremely sinful and persecute God's prophets and their followers. In these cases, the innocent also end up dying. Why would God not save them? The answer that Islam gives is that they are actually saved, because there is an afterlife in which they will be abundantly rewarded. It may be looked as an act of mercy from God that he saved innocent people who lived among evildoers through no fault of their own, and if they had continued to live there, they might have followed evildoers in their sin. If they are killed, they will be considered martyrs, and they will be compensated for their suffering of this world in the next world, many times more than they had suffered. Let's examine for a second a scenario in which God is removed from the picture. If there is no God, then there is no afterlife either. In this case, millions of innocent human beings would have gone through tremendous suffering throughout thousands of years through no fault of their own, only to have their lives end without any reward or compensation for their suffering. Their suffering was a natural consequence of their bad luck and nothing more. As a result, their whole life was a misery. If we put God in the equation, then at least they will get rewarded for their ill luck in this life, in the hereafter. Their suffering would not have been needless, and also it would not go unrewarded. Only with God in this equation can we suggest that there will be a long period of mercy and pleasure after a period of suffering. Finally, we can ask the question, why does God allow suffering? And again, the emphasis is why does He allow it? The topic is not why does God create suffering, but why does God allow suffering? And I think all of us have agreed that it is the humans that actually cause suffering, not God. But the question still remains that even if humans cause suffering to other humans, God is still sitting there, all powerful, all merciful. Why doesn't He stop it? Why doesn't He remove it? Why not just create a system in which there is no suffering? A system in which God can teach and guide people without letting them taste any kind of displeasure or suffering. If this was the case, if we never felt any pain, loss, or discomfort ever, if we lived our lives always happy and content, we would never have appreciated our good condition. We only know of pleasure after experiencing displeasure. We only appreciate relief after going through pain. If we never felt hunger, we would never appreciate or even enjoy food. If we never felt thirst, we would never enjoy cold water either. If we lived in a world where we never suffered, and if we are given a choice to experience suffering, we would have chosen to experience suffering just out of curiosity. And then after tasting it and disliking it, we would want to remove it. In this life, suffering helps us to progress and to learn, to appreciate and enjoy a state where there is no suffering, and a state of only pleasure can only become fully manifest in the hereafter. This is the purpose of suffering in this life, to prepare us for a much higher form of life in the hereafter. The founder of the Ahmadiyya community, who we call the Promised Messiah, also wrote, he said that the righteous people of God, those who have recognized their God, they consider staying in a state without suffering a very dangerous state. And when the trials come to them, that's when their faith really becomes strong. Because they know that all these trials they're facing for the sake of God. So they conquer these trials and they give their life in the hands of God. If you remove suffering, we basically remove life. There can be no life without suffering. And like I said, the Islamic teaching is that we learn to suffer in this world only so that we can have the great pleasure and reward of God Almighty in the hereafter forever. Thank you very much. Good evening.
Ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end of the program, and we will start the question and answer session now. Our volunteers are walking on the floor. Please raise your hand and hand them the question. If you need an extra card, they will also provide you with an extra card. And again, if you need more space, you can write it at the back or get an additional card. Also, if you can please give us some feedback on the program today and be very honest, it will only help us. Good, bad, feedback is feedback, so please, that's greatly appreciated. Our first question is, how big is your version of God? The book of inner knowing. As it is possible, there is other intelligent spiritual life in other forms. What God would they pray to? Not of earth. Who would like to answer that question? So the question is, how big is your version of God? Basically.
Well, I think that the Hindu perspective.
Okay, please. Step microphone on.
Yes. Well, the Hinduism believes that God and universal consciousness exists in everything, all creation. It exists in me, it exists in all of us, it exists in every form of life and non-life as well. So it's all pervading and indestructible. And even if we do say that there are other forms of life which we don't know about, and that would still be a part of creation, and hence we believe that consciousness and God is present even within that.
Okay. From a Jewish perspective, it's I can give the answer that it's complicated based on where or what point of Judaism you're talking about. But traditionally speaking, at the foundation, the Jewish God is actually, well, I guess relatively, the Jewish God is the first transportable God, really, or is a transportable God. It's a God that follows the Jewish people. Traditionally speaking, there is, if you look within the Torah and within everything, it talks about God existing within a realm where the other gods exist. The Jewish God is simply a God among gods. In the story of Exodus, the Jewish God does battle against the representatives of the God of the Egyptians. So it's hard to say how big is the God, but I guess the answer to the question is, traditionally speaking from Judaism, they would pray to their own gods as well, because in a traditional sense, the Jewish God lived in the same world that the Egyptian gods, the Greek gods, everything else lived.
From the Sikhism perspective, I would like to say a verse. It says, Awwal Allah Noor Upaya Kudrat Te Sab Bante, Ek Noor Te Sab Jag Upajaya Kaun Pale Ko Mante. That means everything that is there, that or I can see or cannot see, is created by one light, which that light or the essence is of God. And God is the one whole creator of the universe. Some people call him Allah, some people call him Ram, some people call him Jesus as being God's son. So you could give him any name, but there is only one creator that we believe in.
I would only add that the Quran says that God is the light of the heavens and the earth. And another place it says that He is closest to us, even closer than our own jugular vein. So it's a spiritual existence, and He is the creator of everything. And yes, there could be other worlds and creatures. They would still be the creation of God. And we believe in that one creator, one God, who is the creator of the whole universe.
Please go ahead.
Just a very quick addition. I'm told that fools rush in where angels fear to tread. The Christian faith emerged out of Judaism, and so one of the traditional Judaic understandings for God is God's self-description is, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, a God rooted in a particular time and a particular place. Physicists today tell us that the universe was born about 15 billion years ago and has been expanding ever since. From a God rooted in a very local context and in the experience of a small group of people to a God that is literally millions of light years large, it taxes my imagination to even think about it.
Thank you very much. My next question is again, since I have the card here and you have the mic right in front of you. If God does not allow suffering, does he have any powers to change or stop the suffering? And it's asked to you.
Does God, what I tried to say and what I would continue to say is that God leads us into the heart of suffering, and by embracing and experiencing that suffering as a divine presence, transforms the suffering. How that works in any given situation is always a bit difficult to know, but the God doesn't stand outside of suffering and control it. God is in the midst of our suffering, strengthening, encouraging, and transforming. That's how I would put that.
Thank you very much. Next question is from Mr. Balachandran here. You touched us on having control over our lives and suffering, as well as we'll have to deal with our accumulated karma. Are we able to make right or the bad karma?
Absolutely. As I mentioned, there's this question of free will. And what Hinduism believes is the karma which we bring forth from our previous lives is something which we have to bear with the equanimity. But having said that, the way out of this samsara, or the cycle of life and death and karma, is through God realization or self-realization or nirvana. So just meditation and getting closer to God will get us out of karma.
Thank you very much. The next question is from Mr. Tahasiyad. Why do you say peace be upon him every time you mention Muhammad's name? Peace be upon him. Or in writing his name, write S.A. following his name.
We say peace be upon him for all the prophets, not just for Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. It's basically, God commands us that the Prophet of Islam was a person who had brought this teaching, and he was the most pure, and we should always remember him and love him more than any other human being, because through his teachings and through loving him we will then reach God. And all the prophets for their people are like that. The enemies of prophets do everything to humiliate them and to degrade them, and this happened to every single prophet. This happened to Moses, this happened to Jesus, this happened to other prophets that were not Israelites, other parts of the world. So the same thing happened to Prophet Muhammad, and they wanted to degrade him and humiliate him, and this is our way of kind of just sending blessings that this proves God's existence. This proved that in the end it was the prophet that was successful. Now there's billions of followers of different prophets, and their enemies are forgotten. The Pharaoh, nobody remembers Pharaoh's name. Nobody sent peace on Pharaoh's name, but they still remember Moses. So just like that, the Prophet, all the prophets and Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, we say this as a reminder of the proof of God and their victory against their enemies.
Thank you very much. My next question is to Mr. Brown. Can't you explain more precisely why a life ended up without the new and or benefit someone did good in his whole life? So the question is why the life ended when the person did all good things in his life, and then the benefits of it.
Why would a life end when a person did all good things? Simply, well, I don't mean this to sound glib at all, but simply because that is the essence of life. Is what makes life precious is that life ends. No matter how good you are, it's not being good. Being good does not get you, from the perspective that I've been that I've come to believe and taught through within Judaism. You don't get a reward for being good. Being good is the reward. You do not get more of things because you're good. You give more. So life ends. No matter how good you are, life ends. And that's what makes life precious. What happens, what carries on is the good you did, because it's the good that touched everybody else. It's the good you've taught your children, your neighbors. It is the idea that it is better to, there are few things in the world better to do than plant a garden, because it grows on after you. It's why on Tu B'Shvat we plant trees, because it is a blessing to plant a tree, because it will live and grow for ages. So I don't know if that really answered the question, but that's the best I can do.
Okay, thank you. The next question is directed towards the Hinduism scholar. How does a young abused child be responsible for their own suffering?
Well, again, as I mentioned, suffering is largely because of karma. That's what Hinduism advises. And it could have been some carried over karma by that child from a previous birth. And we see that. And as I mentioned, there's so much inequality, there's so much child abuse and those kind of things happening. It happens to one, it doesn't happen to the other. Hinduism's theory is probably some carried over karma which is manifesting itself.
Thank you very much. The next question is God's wrath a form of suffering for the innocent, for the guilty? So anyone can answer that. Who would like to answer?
Can you just repeat it one more time?
Yes. The question is God's wrath a form of suffering for the innocent, for the guilty?
I believe the question is asking if the form of if God's wrath is a form of suffering for the innocent or
For the guilty.
For the guilty. I think it's a form of suffering for anybody who's found in it. But like I mentioned, there is a belief in afterlife and a belief in compensation, that people do die even as a wrath of God. But first of all, most of them are seen would be evildoers. And again, we have to look at the time of prophets. The followers of prophets were always saved, and they're the ones who clearly said that they warned again and again, and they said that if you do not stop, then God will show His wrath. So people become guilty before that wrath is shown. And some of the innocent that will die will have a compensation. They will be considered like martyrs, and they will be rewarded for in the afterlife. And even if they were innocent and they did not deserve that punishment. So it would not be a form of punishment for them. But in case of God's wrath, then mostly the ones who are targeted are the evildoers.
Thank you very much. My next question is, sorry, go ahead please.
I just thought maybe I'd take a stab at that. I think sometimes we're tempted as we imagine what God is like and what the essence of God is like, tempted to think that God is like what we imagine a human being to be. And so as human beings, we have our anger, we have our wrath, we lash out. My imagining is that God is different, qualitatively different from what we as human beings do. And so that if we are creating havoc in the world, God, rather than be wrathful and causing suffering, which I maintain God does not do, God will be, if we can impute a human feeling to that, will be saddened and hurt and embrace the suffering that we as human beings do.
Thank you very much. Next question is from Mr. Singh. In any time or form, is it possible that there will be a time, an end to suffering?
Yes, there will be a time you can end suffering by completely drenching yourself in God's name. I mean, that is if once you kind of gain higher state of consciousness, what happens is then all these worldly possessions and all the other stuff don't mean anything to you. It's like Mr. Balakrishnan said, karma and all that, but it could be won over with completely surrendering yourself to the God. Yes.
Thank you very much. My next question is from Mr. Brown. How do the actions of others impact karma for others? How do the actions of others impact karma for others?
Okay, I'm not sure if I'm the person you really want answering this because I don't really... my understanding of karma is fairly basic. Might want to pass it over to one of the gentlemen that have a better understanding.
Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Yes.
Kind of, since it was for him.
Yeah. How do the actions of others impact karma for others?
Well, I think it's a question of realizing that this divine overall consciousness is within each one of us. And I think it's all interconnected in some fashion or the other. I'm not speaking out of Hinduism, but I'm just thinking out aloud. And I feel association with people with good karma, that is, people, preachers, people who are saints, that kind of spreads good karma within yourself as well, rather than associating with people who probably don't have the sense of values. And I don't know if that answers the question to some degree.
Okay, thank you very much. The next question is with Reverend Dual. What is the source of suffering? Does God suffer? So there's two questions, two parts of the questions. What is the source of suffering? Does God suffer?
To answer the second question first, yes. God as a spirit which indwells all of creation, certainly suffers when any part of that creation is in pain. What is the source of suffering? That's a great one. And I think there are probably many sources of suffering. I think the pain of losing relationship probably is the most significant source of suffering. It's the brokenness of connections. They could be family connections, one with another, or they could be connections with a place that is experienced as home, or it could be the severing of connections between the essence of the cosmos and the creatures of the cosmos.
So I think this basically explains my next question. Why do all 239 passengers of MH370 and their families have to suffer? Did they all sin? My next question is with Mr. Taha Sayed. What progress do you see for the people of Afghanistan? Every day, numerous people get killed over there. Are they all born to suffer?
Well, I don't know why we would just use one example of one country. This has happened for thousands of years. Certain people go through a time of extreme suffering. And then, in fact, every single civilization has had its ups and downs. At one time, civilizations are rulers, and then a century later or a few decades later, they're ruined. They're completely destroyed. The actions of people, I mean, you know, a lot of the times, the people, specifically speaking, since the question is about Afghanistan,